Have you ever noticed how all the really good stories start with once upon a time? Legends, fairy stories, even Star Wars. Because when the story starts with once upon a time, you know that it's likely going to be a good story. But when it starts with once upon a time, you also know it's not true. It's not a true story. It's made up and pretend. That's why the gospel can't start with once upon a time, because Jesus isn't pretend. He's a real man who lived in a real place, who grew up in a real family, who died on a real cross, who really was raised from the dead. And that's way too much reality for once upon a time. And the way Matthew's gospel grounds the story of Jesus in reality is that he introduces us to this real Jesus, and he gives us his ancestors, real people. And the genealogy isn't something that we often read. We kind of skip that part, but it's an important part because it's establishing that Jesus in history was a real person who really lived. So I just want to read part of the genealogy for us. Matthew chapter 1. This is the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac, Isaac the father of Jacob, and Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers. Judah the father of Perez and Zeraph, whose mother was Tamar. Perez the father of Hezron, Hezron the father of Ram, Ram the father of Abinadab, Abinadab the father of Nahshon, Nahshon the father of Salom, Salom the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab, Boaz the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth, Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of King David. David was the father of Solomon, whose mother had been Uriah's wife. And then there's 8 more verses, and we get to the verse 16. And Jacob, the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, and Mary was the mother of Jesus, who is called the Messiah. Most people love to hear about their ancestors. Like, did you know that Tom Hanks is related to Abraham Lincoln? Ancestry.com, their genealogists, have confirmed that Tom Hanks, the actor, is Abraham Lincoln, the president, is his 3rd cousin 4 times removed. And isn't it funny that we know Tom Hanks's 3rd cousin 4 times removed, but we don't know his parents or his grandparents? They're not interesting, but it's kind of cool to be a descendant of Lincoln. And we all kind of we tell the stories of the cool people in our genealogy. We want someone great in our family tree. And it was no different in Matthew's day. In Matthew's day, your genealogy told you who you were. As Tim Keller says, the genealogy is Matthew saying, this is who Jesus is. And lots of cultures use names or genealogy to tell us this is who I am. So McCarthy in Ireland is son of a guy called Carthy. In Norway and Sweden, the name Johansson is the son of Johan. Now, I'm assuming Google is right here, but in Spanish, Lopez is the son of Lope. And in Portuguese, Estevez means son of Stephen. And in the Bible, you see it in Simon Bar Jonah, Simon the son of Jonah. So your genealogy tells people who you are. And in Jesus' day, no different than today, your genealogy was a way to impress people with your noble roots. So Herod the Great, the king in Jesus' time, he deleted it from the public record, some of his ancestors, because they weren't the kind of people he wanted in his public record of his of his ancestry. So let's look at Jesus and who he is from his genealogy. Now, if you lived in Jesus' day, you would have been shocked by Jesus' genealogy. Because if Matthew was trying to impress you, he didn't do a great job naming the ancestors of Jesus. There was a lot of them he should have left out. Like, firstly, 5 women are named. In those days, no one who wanted to impress people would put a woman in their genealogy. Remember, it was a patriarchal society. Women added no value to the list and maybe even took from the standing of Jesus, because if that's the best he can do, he has to list women. But he didn't just name one woman, he named 5. Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, Bathsheba, and Mary. 5. Not a token 1, but 5. These were people of no account, of no value in the culture, and yet they're central to Jesus' genealogy. And not just that, 3 of them weren't even Jews. 2 of them were Canaanites. 1 of them was a Moabite. These were unclean people. They weren't welcome in the temple. Tim Keller says we would call them racial outsiders. But they're central to Jesus' genealogy. And remember, your genealogy is telling you who you are. And Jesus' genealogy is full of racial outsiders and people of no account. It's worth thinking, what do you think that means? Why would God do that? What is he trying to tell us about himself and us? But you can go on. Rahab, one of the women listed, she's not just a Canaanite, she's a prostitute. Jesus is descended from a prostitute. Not quite something you'd boast about even today. And then when you do get to the noble descendants like King David, someone gives you status, Matthew talks about the darker past of David. In verse 6 he says, David is the father of Solomon, whose mother had been Uriah's wife. It's kind of like, you don't want to talk about that. List David, but don't list that, because that's the kind of part of the family you don't want to talk about. Because what happened then is David uses his power as king to have sex with Uriah's wife while Uriah is away at war. She gets pregnant and David has Uriah killed, so Uriah doesn't find out about what David has done. Kind of like, why draw attention to that? Why mention that in your genealogy? This is supposed to be religious. Then you had Ruth the Moabite. She's almost like a refugee. All the male members of her family have died, and it's almost like she's nowhere to go. She doesn't belong. All outsiders, moral outsiders, racial outsiders, economic outsiders, people of no legal status or standing, no religious status, no economic status. Respectable people don't want those type of people in their ancestry, in their genealogy. Yet Jesus' genealogy is full of them. So what does it all mean? Why would God intentionally go against all that humanity values in terms of status and reputation and place Jesus, the Messiah, in a family like that? Like he's the king. That's why the wise men came to the palace looking for him. Not in a stable or a barn. But being in a stable or a barn, it drives home the point that the genealogy is making. So why? Why God? The Bible doesn't expressly tell us, but there are hints why God included outsiders in his genealogy. The first reason is, believe it or not, the reason is that because God is holy. We sing, holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty. And we kind of think that would be a reason that he shouldn't have them in there. But in the Bible, the word holy means separate from, and it's the only word that's used to describe God 3 times. God isn't love, 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 or peace, 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 but he is holy, holy, holy. And the word literally means separate from, apart from, meaning he's not like us. So the single most significant description of God in the Bible is that he is a being that is not like us. So he will act not like us. He will value things we don't value and despise what we value. So looking at his not like us in Jesus' genealogy, we see God doesn't operate the way we operate. He doesn't have the people on the inside and people on the outside. The cool people and the people you want to ignore. The respectable people and the people you don't want to know or be with. The religious people and the irreligious people. All those divisions mean nothing to him. The worst of sinners are in Jesus' genealogy. Insiders and outsiders, they're all included in Jesus' family tree. And it seems like the ones we would want to exclude most get pride of place. Like he doesn't have to mention Solomon's mother. God doesn't see people the way we see people. God doesn't see you the way you see yourself. And the second reason, also related to the holiness of God, we say, from a human perspective, bad company ruins good character, and there's truth in that. They'll rub off on you. That can happen. And in Matthew's day, They did kind of think that because like immoral people or the people on the outside, they were to be avoided because if you came in contact with them, they would make you ceremonially unclean before God. Their sinfulness would rub off on you. They couldn't go into the temple, and if you touched them, their uncleanness would make you unclean for God. Their unholiness was considered contagious. But in Jesus, all this is turned on its head, turned upside down. This is quoting Tim Keller. Jesus' holiness and goodness cannot be contaminated by contact with us. Rather, his holiness infects us by our contact with him. Come to him regardless of who you are and what you've done, no matter how morally stained you are, and he can make you pure as snow, quoting Isaiah. When we come in contact with Jesus, it's not that we make him sinful, it's he makes us clean. And then you have to think, why would God enter the broken, sinful mess that is humanity, become one of us, take our sin on himself, and suffer the just punishment for our sin? It was our sin that caused all that to happen. Let me tell you a story as why God might do that, what kind of God he is, and how he thinks about us. This is a true story of something that happened at a conference I attended a number of years ago. And the main speaker, I can't remember his name, but he was an Anglican priest. And during a break in one of the sessions, he goes to the toilet and he needed to sit. And while he was sitting, he started to play with a ring his wife had given him a long, long time ago. And it was of huge sentimental value to both of them. And while he's sitting there playing with the ring, he drops it. And it goes into the toilet before he gets a chance to pick it and before he has the toilet flushed. So he stands up, turns around and looks into the water. And there at the bottom, in the middle of all the brown, was the ring. So what do? The thing you value is covered with disgusting stuff, but you value it so much. It means so much to you. What do? But what he did was he reached down into the brown and picked up the ring and cleaned it and put it on his finger. And as he was retelling the story, there wasn't regret, only joy of being able to get his ring back. That's kind of a picture of what God did and why he did it. For God so loved the world that he sent his only Son into our brokenness, into our selfishness and sin. The Son entered broken, sinful humanity, stayed sinless, but became a sin offering for us so that we could become the children of God and Jesus be the firstborn of many brothers and sisters. You know, I want to go back to the idea that God isn't like us and how that is such good news for us. You see, we think God is like us, that he loves the way we do, kind of with limits and with conditions, that he forgives like us, like I'll forgive once, maybe twice, but constantly forgiving, never ending forgiving? No. That we think he's like us because he gets tired of our mistakes and the mistakes we keep making. We think he's like us in that he's got some sort of selfish motive somewhere deep, deep down. But he is holy, holy, holy. He is not like us. He loves us regardless. He didn't love the prodigal son any less when the son cursed the father, and he didn't love him any more than when the son returned. His love is not conditional on our behavior, on our returning love to him. It's not conditional on our obedience. You curse God, and he won't love you any less. You love him, and he won't love you any more. He can't. And actually, that almost doesn't feel right. His love is infinite, not dependent on how we live or what we do or who we are. It almost doesn't feel right. There's nothing I can do to make God love me more or cause him to love me less. Nothing. That actually offends our pride. Even our pride wrapped in a sense of religious fairness, kind of like the prodigal son's older brother. But stay there a little while. Stay in that defense. Keep in the offense. Keep the offense of that thought in your mind that nothing you can do can make God love you more. Nothing you can do can make him love you less. So you might say, well, then it doesn't matter what I do. What's the point in being good? Because God isn't enforcing the rules, making sure we stay within the lines. And if we don't wham, then God isn't like that. But you see, God isn't like that. He's a relational being, has unconditional love for us. And if we see past the offense to our pride, that's really good news. We really need God to be not like us, to be holy, holy, holy. Otherwise, he becomes like us and loving us up to a limit, loving us with conditions. And we'd never be able to stand before him if he was that kind of God. Only the God who is enables us as we are to stand before him loved, no matter who we are, no matter what we've done, no matter where we've been. And his forgiveness is not like our forgiveness. You know how after several wounds or one serious betrayal, we might close our heart to the person. He never does. Picture Jesus on the cross, and he seeks forgiveness for the Roman soldiers who've crucified him. And they didn't do it just because it was their job. They actually invented a way to torture Jesus. They didn't have to put the crown of thorns on his head. They did it because they were enjoying it, torturing him. And while they're rolling dice to see who gets Jesus' robe, Jesus asks for their forgiveness. They're not even asking for it, and Jesus is seeking it. Aren't you glad that God is holy? That he's not like us in any way? That's why we can trust him with our whole lives, with the outcome of our lives. And all the saints before us have done that. That's why it's so shocking to people when Jesus touches the leper and then heals him. He isn't contaminated by the leper. The leper is cleaned by contact with Jesus. In the genealogy, we see that he enters such a family of sinners, identifies with them, is family with them. And at the end of his life on earth, his genealogy isn't just who Matthew lists, but in a sense, it's all of humanity. Because in becoming one of us, becoming fully human, born of a virgin, fully part of the human race, and then on the cross, taking the sin of all the human race onto himself, God made him who had no sin become sin, so that in him we might become good with the goodness of God. As human beings, Jesus is, if you like, in our family tree, fully human. And as Christians, we get to be part of his family tree, if you like, because there was divine purpose at work in all of this, not once upon a time. Our scripture memory verse that we're doing in December captures it. We know in all things God works for the good of those who love him, for those who have been called according to his purpose. For those God foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, that he might be the firstborn among many brothers and sisters. Not once upon a time, but God himself becoming a real person so that we might become real sons and daughters of God. That's a reason to sing, "Oh, come, let us adore him." That's a reason to sing joy to the world, a reason to rejoice, a reason to worship. So let's worship Jesus our Lord and our brother, who with the Father and Spirit have made their home in us.